A shocking outburst. A fractured alliance. Piastri turns on McLaren. And before Austin, the silence is over. In Formula One, frustration rarely explodes overnight. It builds slowly, quietly in the spaces between team briefings, in the tone of a radio message, in the milliseconds lost to decisions that never seem to fall your way. For Oscar Piastri, those milliseconds became months. What began as minor irritation after early season races grew into something far more corrosive: doubt. And when doubt enters a team, performance is never the first thing it destroys. It destroys trust. McLaren had built its 2025 campaign on an image of perfect harmony. Two young stars, equal equipment, shared ambition. On paper, it looked like the model of the future, the team that had learned from its past mistakes, finally managing to balance talent without rivalry. But behind that polished surface, cracks had begun to form long before the cameras noticed. Piastri's engineers had quietly expressed frustration with pit stop timings that seemed to benefit Norris more often than chance should allow. Even McLaren's own data analysts noted the pattern: subtle, but consistent. The Australian didn't accuse anyone of bias, at least not at first. But he noticed. And once a driver starts noticing, the relationship between faith and performance begins to fracture. The turning point came in Singapore. The collision at turn 1 between the two McLarens looked minor, a racing incident, the kind that fills the first lap of every Grand Prix. But for Piastri, it symbolized something larger. Norris, chasing aggressively into the corner, clipped Piastri's car. The team's immediate reaction was silence. No apology. No internal review. No radio message acknowledging the contact. In Formula One, those silences say more than words. When McLaren later declared the matter closed, Piastri disagreed, not publicly, but internally. His response in the post-race debrief was measured, controlled, and impossible to misinterpret. "If we say we race fairly, then we race fairly both ways." It was a professional statement, but within McLaren, it landed like a bomb. Team principal Andrea Stella saw it as an early warning, a signal that his driver's cooperation was starting to collapse. He called for calm, urging both sides of the garage to move forward together. But Zak Brown, the team's CEO, viewed it differently. He believed it was just emotional reaction, that young drivers need to feel the heat of competition. That difference in leadership styles created the first real split at the top. Stella wanted discipline. Brown wanted freedom. Between those two philosophies sat Piastri, the quietest man in Formula One, suddenly trapped in the loudest political storm of his career. The weeks that followed only made things worse. Norris continued to receive the lion's share of strategic preference, not out of malice, but because McLaren's racing logic favored the driver who started higher up the grid. The problem was that those patterns reinforced Piastri's perception of bias. And perception, in a Formula One team, is poison. His engineers began keeping their distance from Norris's crew. Shared debriefs grew shorter. Even casual humor in the garage disappeared. Mechanics who had once celebrated together now worked in silence. The McLaren garage, once united by orange, had turned cold. Inside McLaren's technology center, everything is designed for control: data, process, perfection. But control only works when everyone follows the same rhythm. And in recent months, McLaren's rhythm has fallen out of sync. The issue isn't just trust between drivers anymore, it's trust between engineers. The emotional tension between Oscar Piastri and the team has begun to bleed into the technical operation, creating a split that no algorithm or wind tunnel can fix. It began innocently enough with feedback. Norris and Piastri have always driven differently. Norris prefers a car that turns on instinct, sharp at the front, dancing on the edge of oversteer. Piastri, by contrast, prefers balance: precision over reaction, control over chaos. For most of the season, McLaren managed that difference well. But once their relationship soured, those distinctions stopped being preferences and started becoming sides. Each group of engineers began optimizing the car not just for performance, but for their driver's style. The MCL39, once a unified project, slowly became two machines disguised as one. The turning point came during simulator testing before Japan. McLaren's engineers discovered that the data correlation between Piastri's simulator model and his on-track telemetry had begun drifting, a sign that the car's setup philosophy was no longer aligned. Norris's development path, focusing on front-end aggression, was producing improvements that didn't translate to Piastri's smoother style. To correct this, Piastri's crew requested adjustments to aerodynamic load distribution, particularly over high-speed corner entry. The proposal was dismissed as non-priority. That decision, small as it was, carried a message: one side of the garage now had more influence than the other. The deeper issue isn't technical, it's cultural. McLaren's engineering department, once unified by ambition, is now operating under quiet tension. Piastri's crew feels unheard, convinced that internal decision-making favors the British driver for convenience and narrative appeal. Norris's side, equally defensive, believes Piastri's team has lost perspective and overreacts to every perceived slight. The result is paralysis. Meetings that used to be collaborative are now cautious. Engineers second-guess every comment, aware that even the smallest remark can be interpreted as political. The fear isn't about losing speed, it's about losing credibility. Andrea Stella, a man who built his career on logic and transparency, is fighting a war of communication. He spent years crafting an environment where data speaks louder than ego. But right now, ego has hijacked the data. When an engineer proposes a change, the first question isn't will it make the car faster? It's who does it benefit? Stella knows that this mentality is poison to performance, yet every attempt to neutralize it risks deepening the divide. His greatest fear isn't losing podiums. It's losing belief in process. Complicating everything is McLaren's technical ceiling. The MCL39, once a masterpiece of aerodynamic balance, is showing its limits. The team's early development push for 2026 has frozen updates, leaving the current car with weaknesses that both drivers must endure. The problem is, they endure them differently. Norris fights through instability with aggression, Piastri loses confidence in precision. The car's design language: aggressive entry, light rear balance naturally favors Norris. Piastri knows it. And in a sport where milliseconds decide futures, knowing that your car isn't built around you feels like betrayal disguised as engineering. Behind the scenes, whispers have already begun. Some insiders claim Piastri's frustration isn't just emotional, it's technical mutiny. His side of the garage has allegedly begun compiling internal reports on setup bias, not to leak them, but to protect themselves. It's a silent rebellion, built not on anger but on evidence. McLaren hasn't confirmed it, of course, but the mood in Woking says enough. The laughter has gone. The collaboration has thinned. And the engineers, the lifeblood of McLaren's resurgence, are now looking over their shoulders instead of forward. By the time McLaren's freight arrived in Austin, the story had already gone nuclear. What began as one blunt quote from Oscar Piastri had transformed into a media inferno spreading across the paddock. Headlines screamed in every language: Piastri accuses McLaren of favoritism, the calm Australian turns rebel, McLaren faces internal meltdown ahead of Austin. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was narrative. And in Formula One, narrative is everything. The press conferences were tense from the first question. Andrea Stella faced the cameras with that familiar quiet composure, but this time even he looked uncomfortable. Oscar is an intelligent young driver, he said carefully. He's emotional, and sometimes emotions run high. It was a diplomatic sentence, too diplomatic. Because behind that calm exterior, Stella was furious. Not at the criticism itself, but at what it revealed. For months, he had sensed the trust between his two drivers slipping. Now it was gone, exposed in front of the world with no chance to fix it quietly. McLaren's golden image, two future champions united under one roof, had collapsed in a single soundbite. Zak Brown's reaction was very different. Where Stella saw danger, Brown saw opportunity. He understood the entertainment value of drama. Oscar's passionate. That's what we love about him, he said on Sky Sports. We're not afraid of strong opinions at McLaren. It sounded confident. But inside the team, engineers interpreted it as something else entirely: dismissal. Piastri's concerns weren't being addressed, they were being repackaged as personality. It's the oldest trick in motorsport politics: if you can't control the message, redefine it. Lando Norris, caught in the middle, became the unintentional lightning rod. Every journalist wanted his reaction, and every answer he gave made things worse. When asked if he understood Piastri's frustration, Norris smiled thinly. "Everyone deals with pressure differently," he said. It was meant as empathy, but it landed as arrogance. For fans, it painted him as McLaren's protected star, the one immune to criticism, immune to consequence. For Piastri's supporters, it confirmed everything they suspected: the equality inside McLaren was performance, not practice. Back in the garage, the mood was radioactive. Mechanics avoided eye contact across the two sides. Engineers spoke in clipped tones. The once friendly banter between the garages was replaced by silence. McLaren's internal communications team instructed staff not to comment publicly, not even off the record. But it was already too late. Everyone in the paddock could see the fracture. When both cars lined up for practice on Friday morning, cameras caught Piastri standing alone at the rear of the garage, helmet on, eyes fixed forward. Norris, a few meters away, laughed briefly with his engineer. It was a small moment, but a symbolic one. Two drivers. Two worlds. One team that no longer looked like one. The breaking point came later that afternoon during a closed-door meeting. Stella demanded a joint discussion with both drivers, Zak Brown, and senior engineers present. Witnesses described it as cold, surgical, and uncomfortable. Stella began with data, reviewing the season's strategy patterns and radio communications to prove McLaren's neutrality. Then he paused, turned to Piastri, and asked directly, "Do you believe we treat you unfairly?" The Australian didn't raise his voice. He just nodded once and said, "Sometimes." That single word, quiet, deliberate, unflinching, landed harder than any accusation. Stella didn't respond. Zak Brown shifted in his chair. And everyone in the room realized that McLaren had crossed a line that no amount of statistics could repair. From that moment, containment was impossible. Piastri's words became the story of the weekend. Former drivers weighed in. Jenson Button called his comments courageous. Damon Hill described them as the kind of honesty Formula One rarely allows. Even rival team principals took subtle jabs. Fred Vasseur of Ferrari quipped, "We like our drivers to tell us what they think, privately." It was theater, yes, but it was also a warning. McLaren's internal tension had become public entertainment. That night, Andrea Stella reportedly stayed at the circuit long after midnight, reviewing telemetry in silence. He knows that the technical problems can be solved: instability, tire degradation, aero balance, they're all measurable. But the human problem? That's chaos. Trust can't be simulated. It can't be rebuilt with numbers. And once a driver feels that the team no longer believes in him, performance becomes psychology. The next morning, McLaren arrived for qualifying under the bright Texas sun, the same colors, the same logos, but a different energy. The facade of unity was gone. The tension was visible in every movement. When Piastri's car rolled out of the garage, there was no exchange of glances, no shared nods, just focus. For the first time since joining McLaren, Oscar Piastri wasn't driving for the team. He was driving for himself.